Next Gen GTM podcast. In this series, we talk with experts to uncover Next Gen GTM tools and techniques that are driving measurable results for themselves and their clients. My name is Mike Bell, co-founder CTO at Scheduler AI, and my guest today is Matt Deal, who's a partner at Vaulted and a true expert in all things sales, marketing, and CRMs. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, Mike.
That is an awesome last name, though. Like Deal. Like
Thank you.
I'm sure I'm
Yeah,
not the first person to recognize
you're
it, but
not.
that is a
Right,
great one.
right. Yeah.
Um, so hey man, so I go to the Vaulted site,
Mm,
and you guys clearly have a real emphasis on doing, things that are unique for your clients, like even if they
mhm.
need to be bespoke, not putting
Right,
them through a cookie cutter template.
right.
But I'm gonna guess there are some like trends that you're still seeing in the market that you're getting asked a lot about. Can you just
Mhm.
talk a little bit about like what are the problems and questions people are coming to you and to the Vaulted team with?
Yeah, it's a lot of data problems, right? So it's a lot of thinking about like on one level, seeing a lot of interest with anonymous identification tech, right? So like a Sixth Sense or an Open Send, or I mean, there's a slew of different solutions out there that'll do this, right? Clearbit. Looking at solutions like that to try to think about how can we get in front of people that maybe we couldn't get in front of before, or we know those systems are going away. There's been changes to email, so some of those metrics are going away, cookies are going away. So people are trying to really struggle with saying, hey, how can we extract more data from our owned media, from our
Mm.
social media, right? Like any which way, shape we can. How can we get data into our CRMs and in our system so that we can make smart marketing and sales decisions and things like that?
And do you ascribe to this inbound led outbound kind of term, or what's going on? Like how is
Right.
that what you're thinking about?
Sorry about that.
We've got one too, no sweat.
I've got a Great Dane who really hates the mailman. So can you repeat that question for me one more time? Sorry, that got me
Yeah,
off
yeah.
track.
So I mean, what you're describing, right, with all this, like people coming into the site and doing that capturing, are you
Right.
guys thinking about? I've been hearing the term inbound led outbound a lot lately,
Yeah.
all bound. Like, how are you thinking
Yeah.
about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody who works in or touches HubSpot, right, you're immediately going to think of a lot of inbound, right? Because that's sort of how that company was really rooted and founded, and the philosophy that's still a core part of it, right? That still exists as a thing. We definitely see more interest in like ABM and account-based marketing and
Okay.
outreach, right? Like in conjunction with that. So where that kind of feels a little bit more outbound led to me, to where you are actively going to try to engage people. You don't have a pre-existing relationship. You're trying to get them into your ecosystem and using various channels to get in front of them. But yeah, like I think that's usually tends to be where we see most people live, is like that combination of both, and then really being able to go back to the data, right? To be able to say, hey, like what makes most sense? Like be able to look at your 2024 and say, hey, what actually produced the most revenue? What actually led to deals and led to conversations and things like that?
Are you seeing anything in particular having the most impact today in that space, like broad stroke?
Yeah, one of the most exciting things that we're seeing in anybody in a B2B space is we'll know about this. Intent data, especially from certain data providers, I think is really powerful to say, hey, we're looking for B2B buyers. We know that they're interested in certain topics. I do see organizations struggle with how to engage those folks, right? So you may have an interesting data point that says somebody is researching something, right? How do we make that actionable? Like, what does that translate to? Does that translate to I'm calling them on the phone that afternoon, or I'm sending them an email, or putting them in an ad campaign? And usually 9 times out of 10, I think it's a combination of all of the above and trying to suss out what works and what doesn't in that sense.
Okay, and is that kind of industry dependent on what works or what doesn't? Or again, are you seeing like trends and like again, you guys don't put templates, you don't put cookie cutter,
Yeah,
but like broad
yeah,
strokes, what's
yeah,
working?
yeah. Broad strokes, like I would say what's working is that, well, one of the things that's not working is email, like in general as a concept. That's one of the
Okay.
things that's changed, right? Is that email
Just
in
because of
general.
Gmail, Yahoo, or other?
Gmail, Yahoo is part of it because there were rules that were changed for bulk senders that changed, what spam rates were going to count as, and authentication settings on the email side. But then you also see this translate to, experiences that buyers have as well. To be able to say, one of the shifts that we've seen this year is really like a shift away from buyers wanting to say, hey, I want to book a demo. I want to talk to a salesperson. Like people don't want to have that conversation. Like they would rather go view a demo, And so for a lot of our SaaS clients, for example, we've actually advocated and said, hey, make a demo video, like have that be a softer, frictionless point, right, for that sales conversation rather than forcing people to be on a call that they necessarily don't want to be, right? They will get there, um, but continue to kind of nurture and bubble those people up when you have those relationships, if that makes sense.
Is this like the death of the discovery call for lower, like,
Right,
if you say the death of anything, people are coming
right.
flying out. But
People
let's
are going to
say
come
for
out, come
more
for you.
like,
Yeah,
yeah, like ACVs that are in, call it like the $500 to $2,000 a month, right? Like smaller
right.
contract sizes. Are you seeing that discovery call kind of stuff being replaced by the view a demo coming informed, or
100%. Yeah. And we've actually seen a lot of,
fascinating?
one of the things that we're big on is translating a lot of micro elements or quote unquote micro conversions, right? To be able to say, hey, what does a button click look like to watch a demo versus scheduling a demo with a salesperson, right? Like, and so we can compare those actual metrics to say, hey, like definitively, these people are more likely to engage. And we typically will go as far as to build, all of those data points into lead scoring or some type of system to be able to organize those contacts.
Well, I even noticed, right, when I went on your site, and I'm always curious, who lets people just book time
Hmm.
versus who, puts people through a system and does kind of get back.
Right.
You're clearly, you guys, you come to the site, super creative, very, I'd almost say artistic. But then
Mhm.
once you've captured something, right, then the kind of science starts. So can
Right.
you kind of even maybe talk about that whole glide path in?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that at least it vaulted a lot of the way that we work is really kind of left brain, right brain in a way, right? So we have a creative team that kind of focuses on doing what they do well, which is creative concepts, copy, really being able to break through like consumer sentiment or B2B buyers, or like just get people engaged, right? And then on the other level, this all has to be data backed, right? So we have to set this up in a structure and within a framework to be able to validate like what's working and what isn't. So for us, that tends to be initially starting out with like a big creative concept, right? Like being able to say, hey, this is our initial brief for a direction you could kind of go with this, right? But ultimately, we're looking at data on the back end to say to validate those choices, if that makes sense. To be able to say,
Hmm.
hey, like from this perspective, what would it look like for you to start aggressively A/B testing your site, right? Like, or start to think about different types of cohorts or segments we could put contacts into, right, for A/B testing on email or multivariate, right? So being able to really say, hey, like when we have, and when we do this, we eat our own dog food, right? Like even when we run our own campaigns for ourselves, right? Like we are constantly testing and in that mode to be able to validate what works in the creative side and what doesn't. And there's really no, in my opinion, there's really no way out of that. Like experience is great, but I tend to think that data is a little bit better. So being able to come out and say, hey, like this is definitively, and I think I kind of gave you, an example earlier when we kind of talked about, having clients that are having, kind of this changing B2B buyer cycle that's happened where, buyers don't really want to engage with salespeople anymore. Well, how do you come up with a different system for that? And so it always lives on creative at the start. Like I don't love necessarily coming to it with like a super technocratic approach, right? But we can always validate that. We can always, and so it tends to be a tight loop of creative, feedback in terms of some type of data or analysis or a survey or something, and then feedback to the creative team and kind of rinsing and repeating until we can kind of bubble up something that is much more of a system, much more of a not quite turnkey, not quite set it and forget it. I don't want to make it seem like that because it's a bunch of work, but putting yourself in a position so that you can put things out there, validate those actual decisions, and then actually see that manifest in your data and your overall business goals.
I love that. And I want to do double click on, so that's kind of a fascinating journey in. You were talking a little bit before though about the once they are in and like the lead scoring and the
Mhm.
kind of operations and workflows going back there.
Right.
When you kind of come on and start to help people put these into place, what are some of the first things that you're looking at doing from that, call it like lead scoring perspective? Because I do think that
Yeah.
that's a super interesting one to double click into.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are two big ways to do lead scoring that I've seen. One way is you kind of just make it up and see how close you get, right? Which is not necessarily the best way. I see that a lot, like in people that try to come up and say, we're going to do 5 points to here and -1 point here. And sometimes that's part of it. Like that's the creative process of thinking about what you could do for lead scoring. A lot of times we start with looking at whatever that data set is and being able to reverse engineer the lead scoring back into that. So to be able to say, we did this, we do this frequently. We'll go back and we'll say, let's look at a calendar year or a fiscal year, right? Let's look at the deals that were closed in that period. Well, what are the attributes of those deals? Do they have a geography? Do they have a time period? Are there attributes of the people within those deals? It could be like my go-to is always job title, right? Or job function in some ways. But really being able to go back and say, hey, like rather than, top down and sort of saying, these are going to be all the rules and this is what we're going to use in perpetuity. It never works like that. They're changing all the time. Go from the bottom up, let that data bubble up. What is actually what's actually a good lead, like, and have that based on your actual sales data and sales performance, and everything else like that.
That's brilliant. I love that actually. That kind of like rather than thinking from the what do I think a good lead is coming in, it's like who were actually good accounts for me? What were the
Right,
attributes of those and work backwards, right, rather
right,
than forwards, I would say.
right. And we'll see organizations that like we have this happen where an organization may have like a new initiative or a new focus, a new type of business they want to work with, a new type of client, right? So there's always situations where lead scoring can be aspirational, if that makes sense. Like you're projecting into the future, saying these are who we want to work with, right? Certainly this case in some of the time, but I love doing data driven up to try to be able to back into those numbers.
That's brilliant. I love that way of thinking. So, is this something that I know the HubSpot people ask me? Is this something that ChatSpot right could reverse engineer for me? Right? I mean, HubSpot's
Yeah.
all in on AI. Dharma Shaw's
Yep.
I think like super forward there. But how advanced is that in being able to do the sorts of thing you guys are helping them with?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time we still tend to live in like a separate AI tool, like and usually extract data from HubSpot is usually how we work. ChatSpot is, again, like I feel like even compared to the other HubSpot products that exist that have some kind of AI centric feature, it feels like a little bit more on the beta alpha side of a beta, like to me. There
Sure.
are times in which like it's just not like in terms of things like how we would use it for data analysis, right? To be able to say, hey, show us the relationships between this variable and that variable, and what does that look like? And is there any correlation? There may not be. Or being able to run some light statistics, around different kinds of KPIs and metrics that you might have in HubSpot. It really can't do a lot of that stuff in terms of the analysis side. Um, it's more helpful for I think when you're trying to administrate a HubSpot account, you do want some type of AI assistant in there to kind of
Okay.
help you with some administrative tasks on. And again, my experience has been that it's just been sort of hit or miss, like in terms of some things it'll do particularly well, some things it doesn't know how to do particularly well, right? But I think that might be, that could be the kind of thing that's changed because, as I said, with HubSpot, there's so much AI being put into that product right now, and it's like changing pretty rapidly. So I would suspect that's something they're probably going to double down and continue to refine on, which makes sense for the current AI environment right now, right? And so, but yeah, like I think that it's more of like a fun toy versus something transformational as an administrator, right? Because there's so many other tools that I think are that are relevant, as part of that conversation, right? So being able to say, to be able to pull email statistics out of HubSpot and run them through, Chat GPT and say, hey, like, let's look at the relationship between open rate and the number of closed deals from source from email, right? Or whatever else like that, right?
So you're doing some extraction, loading in, say, a CSV file to
Yep.
ChatGPT and actually
Yep.
interrogating it there. It does fascinate me that you're able to do that so efficiently and you can't do it in ChatSpot where you would think the data would be like natively able to be
Right.
interrogated.
Right. And the stuff that I like, things that I would want to know, like even about my own database, right? So we're HubSpot partners, we have HubSpot ourselves. Like showing me interesting relationships and patterns, like is something that I think AI could be incredibly powerful for, and that we use a lot of to be able to say, we know these things exist, but we're not clear about their relationship or their flow. So like user journeys are like that. So to be able to say, well, we're running a webinar. Well, what was the factor of the webinar as it relates to our sales this quarter? Stuff like that, right? To be able to say,
Interesting.
you know what I mean? So, and being able to, and ChatSpot just really isn't in a position, despite having, and you're right, like despite having that native data set, to be able to do a lot of that stuff. So, so again, like I don't find myself, I've been on the platform since 2017. I don't find myself using it a ton. I love AI. So, but again, like I'm, sure people have a range of experiences and things like that.
Well, I guess that is curious then. So you love AI, and I think you do a lot of this stuff, and you're already using it today.
Mhm.
What do you think will be kind of the next step change of AI in the go-to-market space?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's still in some ways surprising to me, like how many, maybe this is just anecdote, like how many people that I meet in day-to-day life that have never touched an AI tool. You know what I mean? Like that have
That's such a
never
good point.
really,
Yeah, we feel like in our
yeah,
bubble that it's like, oh,
yeah,
but yeah, yeah, here you're dead
yeah.
on.
And I'm like, yeah, and like everybody I talk to, I'm like, hey, you can do this, or you can do that, like, or hey, like I think of 1,000 different ways to use, even for little things um like I own an antique car and I have to frequently find
Okay.
parts. Like I made a custom GPT to go specifically search in this like parts manual from 1953, right? That's
Oh,
all this
that's
bot
so
does.
cool.
Stuff like
That's
that, right?
awesome.
Yeah. And so there's I think there's so many different ways to be able to engage with it. But I think that like I think the thing that I see more than anything else, and I think this has helped by tools that have more of a delineated focus, right? To say, hey, here's how you literally use this thing. Because I find that with some
Mm,
AI programs, they can be so, it's such blue sky that people can get overwhelmed, or think, I don't
interesting.
even know where to start with this, or I don't even know how to functionally use this in a way that's like meaningful for productivity or for analysis or anything else like that.
It's such a good point. We always see that people like a blessing and a curse of these AI tools tend to be that they are very open template, right? So it's like the
Right,
you can do anything, but that becomes very overwhelming in some ways. Where it's like,
right,
no, I'm used to pointing and clicking and having reliability, right? That it
right.
almost feels scary to open that Pandora's box a little bit if you're not well versed in some of these tools.
I also think
Um,
it's hot, like just in the space right now. Like you're seeing things happen so rapidly. I think I saw like an AI CMO the other day, right? Like it connects to your ad
yeah.
accounts, right? And it's supposed to like validate that. I think there's a lot of these things that are out right now where people are trying to figure out, well, like whether the tools are good, because that's like a thing too, because they're just coming out so
Yes.
rapidly, right? And being
Yes.
able to say like what actually is going to make, a significant difference in terms of like, my how I operate each day, things like that.
100%. Have you seen anything with some like flickers of real promise, like any tools or anything like that that you're like, I think this one or these could be real?
Yeah, my go-to is still ChatGPT forever. Like it's just my natural because it's more of like not like quite like a sandbox, but it's sort of the natural place that I kind of go and that we have kind of a slew of custom GPTs and custom actions for that now. Other stuff that I've seen Dicer AI, I think was one tool that we were kind of exploring that was one, supposedly, again, take this with a grain of salt. It's supposed to go in and kind of do analysis and competitive analysis of like ad copy, right? Which might be
Oh,
the kind of thing
fascinating.
that you would normally have like a marketing specialist do or something else like that.
Yeah.
I think that stuff is helpful. It's also helpful, I really think for, really think for analysis. But yeah, I really haven't come across a ton that I felt like is super duper transformational, like in terms of that I can approach it without skepticism, if that makes sense, to be able to say, hey, I'm going to give this a shot. So, but yeah, there are definitely some tools that I think you're going to kind of continue in that direction that I think makes sense. So,
Yeah, I mean, it will be fast. I think, we're kind of, they always talk about the hype cycles, right? And then you kind of hit that like that kind of reality point, right? That I think we're all at now, and there's still a lot of innovation. I mean, heck, we're doing a lot of it on our side in the space, right? But really pushing on the like what is real and not just neat, but
right.
like what is actually getting um, results. So
Yeah. Yeah. We've done a lot with, send you the link. We did a case study with CoWorks here in Raleigh. They are a SaaS provider that provides software for co-working spaces. And what we did with them was a lot of AI content generation, and it 3 or 4x their traffic
did
in
it
a matter
really?
of in a matter of about 6 months. So, and I think that's
Wow.
one of the things that's like kind of in flux now because we had so many clients, when Chat GPT and these tools started kind of rolling out, they say, hey, can I use this in content production? And we just said, we don't know. Like we just definitively did not have the data to be able to say like this is what you should do, and we don't want to conjecture. And so what we did was we started developing. This is like our thing too. We kind of use our own selves as like a test bed first before we
Sure.
do with any of our clients, right? And so we started out doing that. And then, yeah, it led to a significant increase in traffic, like a 30 or 40% increase in revenue.
Oh
I
gosh.
think that some of these things, like that all that sounds impressive, which I think it is. But I think one of these things that's changing is really trying to think about how search is going to change with AI, which is like a
Oh,
whole topic in and
100%.
of itself. So, because I think a lot of people are very, especially from the recent updates, are very trepidatious about AI content and everything else like that. I think there's a way to do it and thread that needle, but yeah.
I do agree with you. I think that's gonna be a fascinating space. Anything
Mhm.
we didn't hit on today, here in this that you think people looking in this space, right, thinking about, tools, processes, where the future of GTM is going that we didn't cover?
No, I mean, I think anything in the, again, like anything in that data space, right, is the other thing that I keep seeing, like is where, I have sales leaders that will come and I'll say, hey, tell me about, your ideal customer, right? Like what do they do? How do they act? Like where do they work? Like all that kind of stuff. And then we go look at the data set and we see a lot of data that's missing, data that hasn't been
Mm,
populated by a rep, that isn't sourced by automation, that isn't populated in a workflow, that doesn't come out of like an AI tool or anything else like that. And really being able to get that house in order is like mostly what I advocate for a lot of organizations to say, hey, this might not matter this year, right? Like it might not matter in 2024 as much, right? But 2025 is going to matter a lot because that data is what you're going to use to be able to make smart decisions for your next year, and be able to back into, continual relationships where you can consistently produce revenue, you consistently produce sales, right? And it's not ambiguous, right? Like it's not quite a science, but you've got things kind of dialed in to a degree. You've got some guardrails to be able to say, okay, this guy can be an ICP, or this person could be, a potential customer based on these attributes and things like that.
that's awesome. I love that. I mean, it all starts and ends with the data, right? In a lot of ways, I think is
Yeah,
what I'm hearing you say is you've just got to
yeah,
be super grounded there in reality, right? And
yeah,
not just in the ideals.
yeah.
Awesome. Well, if you're looking for an amazing HubSpot implementation partner on this, you guys should definitely check out Vaulted. Like I said, Matt, I even read like a bunch of your blog articles. They're really well done. So,
Good.
uh, great content there.
Yeah,
Thanks for joining us on this episode, and yeah, really look forward to catching up with you further, man.
yeah. Thank you, Mike.